Hey everyone, welcome to the sew along for the Prudie Pettiskort. As per usual, the first thing to do is cut out all of your pieces. So this is all the pieces to the skirt here. You've got the waistband with the elastic and the outer skirt pieces. We've got the pieces for the little shorties underneath, so that's your front and back pieces and your leg bands. This is the pants extension piece. This is for the two woven tiers of the underskirt, and this is the top tier of the underskirt. You notice that the pants extension piece and the top piece of the underskirt are very similar. This one's just a centimetre wider than that one, so just make sure you keep an eye on which is which. We're going to get started today with assembling our little shorties underneath. So I'm going to pop those bits to the side and our underskirt pieces to the side for now, and we're going to work on these guys. Okay, so these are the bands. I've just pressed those in half with right sides facing. If you do, wrong sides facing, so you can't see that in this light with this fabric, but this is the outside of the fabric, or the right side, and this is the wrong side of the fabric there. So press them in half with wrong sides facing. You don't have to do that, that just makes it a lot easier later on after you've sewn them into a cuff to fold them in half. But first things first, we've got the front piece and the back piece of the little pants underneath. So you've got to put those together with right sides facing. So again, this is the good side of the fabric here, and this is the inside here. I'm going to put those right sides facing and line up these two side seams. Just like this. So this is stretchy fabric, so we've got to use a stretch stitch on it. So if you're using your sewing machine, there's absolutely no reason why you can't use your sewing machine. You just have to use a stretchy stitch on it, so a zigzag or another stretch stitch. And if you want any details on sewing knits on your sewing machine, I have done videos on that in the past, and I will link them in the description to this one. So if there's anything that I don't go through thoroughly enough for, or you'd like some other options for your sewing machine for doing hems or seams on your sewing machine, I'll pop that link in the description for you. But for now, we're going to do the side seams and the crutch seam. So obviously that doesn't quite line up. You've got to fold that back, but don't get any of this caught in the seam. Okay, so we're just line that up, and I'm going to use my serger today for these, but like I say, sewing machine's absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm going to sew the two side seams on the pants and the crutch seam. While I'm over there, I'm also going to prepare my bands. So like I say, these were folded and pressed in half, but for now we're going to open those back out. And this is the right side of the fabric, so you need to fold them in half, right sides facing. Okay. Fold them in half, right sides facing like that. Line up this end seam, and that's where we're going to sew along the end seam. Okay, we'll do that for both of the cuffs, and I'll be right back. Okay, so there we have our pants sewn together at the sides and at the crutch seam there. I've given those a press. I've pressed this seam towards the back of the pants so it's sitting nice and flat. And then we have our two leg cuffs with this side sewn and pressed. So the next thing to do with these is to turn them back on themselves to make a cuff. So since we pressed this seam into there, the crease into there earlier, that's going to make that a lot easier. So just like that. Alrighty. And so this now is right side out. So this is the right side of the fabric on the outside. Alright, the next job is to put our leg cuffs into the leg holes. We're going to do that by dividing the opening of the leg hole into 4 and the cuff into 4, and then pinning those bits into each other. So to divide your cuff into 4, I normally start with the seam as 1, and half, fold it the other way, same for the other one. Alright, and then to divide the leg hole into 4, I start with the side seam as the first one. Walk the edges along each other like that. Do we get to the second? Turn it the other way, and we've got the same procedure then for the third and fourth. That's just it. So those quarter marks are obviously going to be on the same point on the other side. I find it easiest to just okay, so now we have the quarter marks of the leg holes marked and the quarter marks of the leg bands marked as well. The main pants piece is inside out still, so you can see the seams on the outside here, and this is the inside of the fabric that's visible. I like to line the seam in the cuff up with the side seam of the pants, but that's obviously, you can line that up wherever you like. So we're going to take this, the band, this is the folded edge here, we're going to put it inside the leg hole. So you're taking the band, folded edge first, inside the leg hole, so that you're lining up the raw edges, the 2 raw edges of the band with the raw edge of the leg opening. And then you just match up your quarter points and pin them to each other. I like to have the seam allowance of the pants going in the opposite direction to the seam allowance of the band, so that just reduces the bulk at the seam there. So I don't know if you can see. So the seam allowances of the band are going in this direction, and the seam allowance of the pants in the other. Just for a little less bulk on that side seam there, makes it easier to serge over. Now the leg band is a little bit shorter than the leg opening, so you just have to stretch the leg band slightly to meet up with the leg opening as you serge around. So there it is with the quarter marks clipped. If you're doing a bigger size, this is a size 2, so obviously it's teeny tiny and I'm not dealing with a lot of fabric there, but if you're using a bigger size, you might want to stretch that out between and add another clip just to make it easier to manage as you sew it. Alright. And then we've got one leg hole clipped. We'll do the other one the exact same way. Folded edge facing inwards and put it inside the leg hole. There we go with both leg holes clipped. I'm going to take it over to the serger, sew around that opening, just gently stretching out the leg band to match the leg opening as I go. Okay, so there's our seams sewn and our little cuffs on. And give that seam a press towards the shorts. And there are our little shorties ready to go for underneath. So we'll just put those aside for now as well, because the next thing is the underskirt. So the top tier of the underskirt is a knit fabric, so we're going to put it to the side for a moment too, and we're going to prepare the gathered layers. So the underskirt has two gathered layers that are both the same length, I suppose, for want of a better word, depth, this way. So what we're going to do is join these are strips cut from the width of the fabric. So we've got a selvage at both ends here, and we're going to join all of our strips end to end like this into one big long strip, and then we're going to cut it to the two lengths that we need for the second tier of the skirt and for the third or bottom tier of the skirt, the underskirt. So depending on what size you're making, you'll have a different number of these. I think it's 4 width of fabric strips for the smaller sizes and 5 for the bigger sizes. And if you're using a different width of fabric, then a little bit of maths will be in order for how many you need to do. But what we're going to do is just join them all together end to end like this. Probably don't need to, but I'm going to take a second to clip them together so that I don't get things muddled up when I'm over at my machine and end up with one seam on one side of the strip and the next seam on the other side of the strip. Okie doke. But just sew these together and make sure that it's not going to fray. So overlock, zigzag, French seam, something like that. Okay, alrighty. So here we have our big long strip. We're just going to measure out our two tier lengths. So for the size 2, there's a little chart in the pattern instructions that let you know, but for size 2, the second tier, or the first of the woven tiers, is 122 centimetres long. So I'll just measure that out, and then the second tier is double that at 244 centimetres. So just so 122. And then our second tier will need to be twice that long at 244. So same deal, measure it out and cut it. Okie doke. So there we have our tier number 2, or the first woven tier. And here we have tier number 3, just like that. All right, so now what we're going to do is gather the top of the third woven tier down to half its length, and then sew that onto the first woven tier. There's a lot of different ways to gather fabrics, and I have put a little link in the instructions on a few different ways. The way I'm going to use today is by using my serger. So I'm going to adjust the tension on the needles, and I'm going to adjust the differential feed and the stitch length, so a little bit higher stitch length, a little bit higher differential feed, and a little bit of tighter tension in the first 2 needles. I'll need to do a little bit of testing to make sure that it's gathering to the right ratio to get it down to what I want, but the little bit of fiddling around with that testing will save me a lot of time later trying to manually gather down the top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to use this little extra, the little extra bit that I cut off my strip to do the testing with my overlocker to make sure I've got the gathering length right, and then I'll be away. I'll come back when I have the top of this one gathered to the right length, which is half its original length. Okay, so there we have our bottom tier, or the longer tier, completely gathered up there. This should now be the same length as this one here ungathered, which is the top tier, so technically this way around. Alright, like this. So what we're going to do now is get this tier, which is tier 2, and this tier, which is tier 3, gathered. We're going to take the bottom of tier 2, I'm going to place it right sides facing against the gathered top of tier 3. And pin them together. Pin, clip, whatever you're using. Just like that, all the way along. Alrighty. Just make sure when you're pinning those that you've got them right sides facing. So that's one of the seams on this tier 2. It's on the outside, and I know there's a seam. There you go, and there's one of the seams on tier 3, or the bottom seam. So now we're going to take this to the machine. I'm going to turn my overlocker settings, serger settings, back to their usual settings for wovens, and serge those two together. If you're using the sewing machine, we'll just sew those two together with your regular seam allowance, but then you're going to need to finish off the raw edges to make sure there's no fraying later on. So either serge them together or sewing machine, and then a zigzag stitch along the edge to finish the raw edges. All right, here we are. We've finished that along there, and we open it out like that. There we go. Tier 2, tier 3. Next thing to do is to top stitch this. So all we're going to do is fold this open like this, and then top stitch along there, just with the sewing machine, stitching this tier to the seam allowance there. Keep everything facing the right way. We'll do that all the way along. Okay, now that we've top stitched along that seam, the next job is to gather the top edge of tier number 2, which is this one here, in the same way that we gathered the top edge of tier number 3. So gather up along there. Okay, so second lot of overlocking, serging, gathering done, and we're starting to look a bit more like a petticoat. I forgot to mention before, if you are using your overlocker to do your gathering like I am, and you're swapping back and forwards between the gathering settings and a regular setting to join pieces together, just take a quick photo of your settings, and that way when you go back to gathering, you don't have to do any testing again. You can just turn them straight back and you're away. All right, so next step from here is to join tier 1 to this. Now tier 1's the stretchy stitch, the stretchy tier. There's two pieces that look very similar. The tier 1 is the wider of the two, so tier 1's 4 centimeters wide, and there's another piece called the pants extension, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's only 3 centimeters wide. So that's how you can tell you've got the right one there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to join this stretchy strip to the gathered top of the second tier. So to do that, we're going to divide this into 4, and we're going to divide the length of the top of this into 4. We're going to pin those to each other and then stretch and sew them together. So just divide that guy into 4, and then do the same with the top here. Okay, so I've got, this is right side facing up, so this is the right side of this, and then we want to get our strip here. This is the right side of the strip, and we want to have it facing the right side of the rest of the skirt and matching up the center clip there. Now, just like when we did the leg bands, we're going to gently stretch tier number 1 to match up with the length of the gathered edge of tier number 2 as we sew them together. marking those corresponding points. With this one, because it's quite long, you might want to put some additional clips in between. So like this, stretching the stretchy fabric to meet the gathered edge. And adding an extra clip like so. I don't know if you can hear, there's a chook in the backyard making her feelings known. We have some new chooks in our chook yard and she's confused and disappointed. She will adjust. Okay, so there we go. So we've got twisty there. And then we're just going to sew tier 1 to the top of tier 2, gently stretching tier 1 out to meet the gathered length of the top of tier 2 as we go. If you're using a sewing machine for this, which you can, that's absolutely no problem. You can use a straight stitch to do the original seam to join them together. And then if you have an overlocked edge here like I do for your gathers, you won't need to do any additional edge finishing, but if you have a raw edge here, you'll need to do an additional zigzag stitch along the edge to make sure that doesn't fray down the line. Okay, so there we've got tier 1, the top tier sewn on the top of our underskirt. That's what it looks like there. The next thing we've got to do is sew this into a circle, so you just fold it in half with right sides facing. Match up the side seam here and sew or serge it together. If you sew it together, you'll need to then finish the seam allowance to make sure it doesn't fray. There we go. I'll sew that one and be back. Alright, so there we have our side seam sewn. The other thing I did while I was at the overlocker was to serge around the raw edge at the bottom of the hem here. The next step on the pattern calls to sew a double fold hem at the bottom here, so that means press it over once 1 centimetre and then press it over again and top stitch it down like that, giving no raw edge. It's a long edge and I'm pretty lazy when it comes to pressing things over, so what I prefer to do is just do a nice wide serged edge like that, which is just under 1 centimetre wide, and then I use that as my guide and I just take it over to the machine and fold it as I go like that, fold it around and top stitch it down, and then I get my double fold hem. So I'm going to head off and do that. Okay, so now there we have our hem sewn up and our underskirt is complete. The next step in the process is to join the little shorties to the underskirt and the pants extension here, just like that. So the first thing to do for that is to take your pants extension piece and with right sides facing, so this is the right side of the fabric here on the inside, so right sides facing, and just sew that in there. Okay, so here's our pants extension. all sewn up. And we're going to join these 3 together. So because we're going to be joining all 3 waistlines together, I'm going to start by dividing the top of each one into 4 and just putting a little pin or a mark, anything that suits. So this has already got 2 quarter marks marked with the side seams. So you just need to do centre front and centre back for the pants. Okay, so this is the only, what I would say, potentially confusing bit. So it's kind of a trust the process kind of moment. It's hard to figure out how it's all going to end up in the right way, but trust me, it does. So with your pants inside out, so you can see all the seams, but the pants extension in the right way. So the seam's on the inside there. And I'm going to put the seam at the centre back of that, but that doesn't really matter. You can put that wherever you like. But we're going to put the pants extension around the outside of the top of the pants, while the pants are inside out and the pants extension is in the right way. So you've got the wrong side of the pants extension fabric against the wrong side of the pants fabric. And then just pin those 4 quarter points together. Shouldn't really be any stretching to do here. The pants extension is the same length as the circumference of the top of the pants. So it's more an exercise in lining things up properly than it is in stretching or evenly distributing stretch around the top, nothing like that. Just lining things up properly. Okay, so there we've got our pants inside out with our pants extension in the right way around the outside of the top there. The next thing to do is turn the underskirt inside out so you can see all the seams here. And put that around the outside of the pants. Again, lining up the quarter marks. And you can choose where to put the seam on your skirt. That is entirely up to you. I tend to do it at a side seam. I feel like I probably made that choice arbitrarily the first time and I've just done it the same ever since. So it really is a personal choice. Again, there shouldn't be any stretching involved here. The circumference of the top tier of the skirt, of the pettiskirt, is exactly the same as the pants extension. And the circumference of the top of the pants. So again, just an exercise in lining it all up properly and making sure they're sandwiched in the right order. Okay. Now, to make that easier to sew, I'm going to add an additional pin in each of the spaces between the other pins. Lining up the top of all 3 layers. Okay, so then we've got it all sandwiched together. We've got the pants inside out. You can see the edge of the pants extension there, and the skirt and the underskirt inside out as well. And then we're just going to serge around that top opening. If you're using your sewing machine, just make sure you're using a stretch stitch because this is all stretchy now. Okay, so there I've sewn around the top. And then this is where the magic happens. Push the shorts down inside. And there we have the shorties and the underskirt all joined together like that. And this seam that could be a little bulky if it were against the skin is there between the underskirt and the shorts, and the little shorties. And we're left with this top edge to join it to the outer skirt. All right, and that bit's done for now. So we're on to the outer skirt. Here's the pieces I've got for that. So this is our piece of elastic. There are elastic measurements in the pattern, but all elastics tend to differ a bit on how stretchy or firm they are. So if you have access to the person that's going to be wearing the skirt, I always recommend doing a custom elastic that's going to be comfortable sitting around their waist. You don't sew through the elastic or anything with this pattern, so it's not going to end up any looser from that process or anything, so you're safe to just measure a comfortable fit. And then sew it into a circle by there's a 2 centimetre overlap in, which is about 3/4 of an inch in the measurements that are in the pattern. So I just overlap and give it a zigzag. So there we have our elastic. Apart from that, we have our 2 outer skirt pieces here and the skirt waistband. So I've done the same thing with the skirt waistband as I did with the leg bands for the little shorties, where I've pressed it in half, so just to make it easier later on where we're putting everything together. But you don't have to do that, obviously you can manage okay without doing it, but I find it does make it easier. When you go to put the elastic inside the waistband later on, it makes it easier to sit it up against this crease. So for the elastic at this point, we need to fold it in half like this with right sides facing. So again, hard to tell with this fabric, but this is the outside of the fabric and this is the inside. We're going to fold it in half and we're just going to serge down this edge here. Serge, overlock, or sew with a stretch stitch. Okey-doke. And while we're heading over to the overlocker, we're going to do the skirt portion as well. So this is the right side of the fabric there, and this is the right side of the fabric, so right sides facing of your 2 outer skirt pattern pieces. Line them up and sew these side seams. as the next thing that's going to happen to this after the side seams are sewn is that the hem is going to be sewn. I'm going to overlock the hem edge while I'm there. Okay, so I'll start with the waistband. Waistband's sewn now there, and the next step with the waistband is to put the elastic inside. So just fold your waistband in half along that pre-pressed line, or just in half if you didn't press a line. This is with the right side out, and then place your elastic in between the two layers. The elastic and the waistband should be the same length, so you're not stretching it out, having to fiddle around too much. But we'll put the elastic inside the waistband here, and then I'm going to put a few clips on to hold it all together while I do the rest of the bits. Okay, so I'm going to put clips on the waistband at the quarter points, because that's what I'll need in a bit next time we work with the waistband. And while I'm doing that, I'm just making sure that the elastic's right up against that fold there. Okay, so there's our waistband ready for next steps. I'm just going to pop that to the side. Alright, and we've sewn the side seams of our I've sewn the side seams of the outer skirt here, and like I said, I did serging around the hem. Now in the instructions it says to serge around the hem, and then should you wish to put a gathering, like a basting stitch around the edge to pull it in just slightly to make it easier to fold up and press the hem, because obviously in a circle skirt the outer edge is longer than where you're going to be pressing it up to. To make that a bit quicker, I just adjust the tension on my overlocking so that it pulls the edge in just a little bit. So you can see, this is curling up here where the edge is being drawn in a bit. And that means when I go in to press this at the ironing board in a minute, that's going to pull that up just nicely like that, and make that outer edge the same, gathered in gently to the same as this edge here. So the hem is 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. So press that up now, and then top stitch it in place. I'm going to use a twin needle on my sewing machine, but you can use any other stretch stitch option that you prefer. Okay, so I've not stitched this up yet, but I wanted to show you how nicely that hem presses up with just that tiny bit of gathering, and how it doesn't leave it wobbly or anything. Ready to sew. Alright, so there we have our hem sewn, and we're on to the last steps. So, our underskirt with the shorts attached, we have our outer skirt and our waistband. So our waistband's already divided into 4. I'm going to divide the top opening of both the outer skirt and the underskirt shorts combo into 4, and then we're going to lay them up and pin those quarter points together. So this guy has a seam at the back, that the seam of the pants extension is at the back. I suppose the only thing to be sure is that your shorts are on the right way. Shorts are sitting the right way round. You don't want to end up with the shorts sitting this way and then you've got a side seam centre front of the skirt when you've got them on. So just make sure you've got everything the right way out. Shorts are going the right way. And the quarter points marked in the top there. Okay, so for this to go together, we put the outer skirt, unsurprisingly, over the outside of the underskirt. And then pin the quarter points together. You should notice that the side seam of these shorts is lining up with the side seam of the outer skirt. It's a good way to know that you're on track. Okay, so there we have our underskirt and our outer skirt pinned together. We're going to take our waistband piece with the folded side facing downwards, so you've got your elastic inside here pressed up against the edge of this fold. You've got the seam on the waistband towards the back of the skirt, so lined up with the seam of your underskirt there, of your pants extension. And we're going to put the waistband around the outside of the other two layers and clip the quarter points together. So now you'll have 4 layers of fabric clipped together at those points. The top of the back waist, the top of the pants extension piece, the outer skirt, and the 2 layers of fabric on the waistband. To make sure when you're clipping the waistband on that you're making sure that the elastic is pushed away from this edge and it's pushed towards the down at the bottom fold there. So there, clipped on at the 4 quarter points. I'm going to go around again and put another clip in between each of those clips. Again, pushing the elastic down out of the way. And lining up the raw edges. So there we have it all clipped together and ready to sew. I'm going to, missed a clip. Add one in here. Alright, now I'm going to take it to the serger, the overlocker and go all the way around that edge, catching all 4 of those bits of fabric into the seam, pushing the elastic over and making sure that the elastic doesn't get caught in the seam. Okay, all serged around that top opening, and that was our last step. And there we have it, the Prudie Pettiskirt. 100% cartwheel proof, super twirly, great for costumes or just for everyday wear.